Good evening, friends.
Hey, Johnson.
I feel so official on this mic. It's really exciting. I'm Jessie White. I'm the Arts and Spirituality Coordinator here at Pendle Hill. And I just wanted to express our joy for having this exhibit, Arla Patch's exhibit, A Heart Story, here at Pendle Hill. It has meant a lot to many, many people. We're just really thrilled to have your work. I also wanted to point out two things. One is that we have these excellent brochures that have some information about the show right outside if you're interested in having one of these. And two, there is a book to leave comments and reflections on the exhibit. So please, after the talk and after you've had some time with the work, leave a message for Arla in this book. Thank you both. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessie.
Can I do a little prompt here? If you would like to be on our email newsletter list, please go ahead and sign this. Just give me your name and your email, and you'll get a monthly newsletter from us about what's going on here.
How does one turn off the mic?
Press the red button again.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for every person that's in this room and some who came from over an hour away. I really appreciate it. And I especially want to thank John Mayer, who I introduced some of you to. Cookie, that's John right there. John invited me to do this. Luckily, he's on my mailing list and he was a little bit familiar with some of the work. And I'm so grateful because it was up during the 4-day conference. So I got to share that with Indigenous people and people that I knew and didn't know. So it was really an honor. And thank Jessie, because this beautiful trifold that she mentioned, she did all. I was treated like a queen coming here. It's a wonderful place to exhibit as an artist for sure. And I also wanted to let you know that my best friend from elementary school and a dear friend from junior high and high school are sitting right here.
All right.
Yes. And also the resident musician who I met at the conferences here, and my dear friend Amy, who I met in Maine. She was a sweet intern from Haverford who came up and worked on the Truth Commission with me, and that's how we met. And we've stayed connected through time. So 600 years ago, I have no doubt I would have been burned at the stake because I hear voices and I see visions. And I think I'm getting that sound that they were complaining about. Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. And thank goodness the Quakers have a testimony of tolerance because they haven't rejected me even though they know that about me. What happened was I woke up one morning and I had this vision. And it was of a woman made out of ferns. And she was in the victory pose, which I only found out later that is called the victory pose. And it's a pose that my nephew, who does personal training work, says people should wake up every morning and do that pose because it makes you feel like you won the race. I mean, it's like, that's what the energy is to you. But I didn't know what it meant. I just knew that I had that vision. And I also, as an artist, knew you don't take those for granted. This isn't just like, oh wow, weird. I was half asleep in the morning when I got the vision. So I set out to figure out how to make the image. And having taught my former high school students who are here art history, I don't know if you remember any of the times when the students put their arms in the slide. And there was one time when I said, okay, why don't you just get up there, and I focused this impressionist portrait painting on the student, and it looked really cool. It looked like they looked like the painting. So I had that in the back of my mind. So I photographed ferns, projected it onto black absorbent velvet, got in front of it, got some help. You'll see in the back of my books back there how I did it with a tripod and somebody helping me to photograph. Photographed in the dark the projection in real time. So this is not a Photoshop deal. Mm-hmm. So when I got them back, they were slides, I was like, oh my God. It looks like a woman made out of ferns, which is what the vision was. So I went on to do a whole bunch of them. This one actually got in a show at the Harvard Divinity School. And this one is Lily Leaves. So I did 16 of them, and I guess this is an audience that I could tell this story to. At the same time this was going on, I was also ending a relationship, a life partner with Mr. Challenge number 2. And I had this really painful, dramatic presentation of a fibroid tumor. And when I got to the doctor, she said it was the size of a baseball. And then I read Christian Northrup, who is a doctor in Maine who has a national reputation, and she does both the best of allopathic and alternative. And she said, many women have fibroid tumors, but they become problematic when women are fed up. So that really hit me right in the marrow, because I knew I was fed up. I knew I was living with a male partner and 2 male teenage boys, his son, my son, and I was totally the martyr mom, and the marriage wasn't working, and all of it. So I decided to call my sister, who's a midwife. And she said, dial 1-800-MIDWIFE and you'll find the closest midwife. I found the midwife, and the midwife said, well, we need to look at it, so we'll have to get a sonogram. Well, given insurance and being a self-employed artist, took me 6 months to save up. During those 6 months, I did my hike to the top of the mountain. And every day I said, okay, wait a minute, this invasion, which feels disgusting to me as an invader, isn't really. It is a teacher. It is a sage. It has come to teach me something, because it's in my creative center. So I began this, would you be willing to shrink as I learned the lessons you came to teach? Would you be willing to shrink? And I started seeing it in my mind's eye get smaller and smaller. And my sister, who is a midwife, told me they look like a burl on a tree. Only they look like that white fibrous stuff that the cutting boards, the white cutting boards are made out of. Only it looks, so I had a really good visual. And I kept seeing it kind of untangle and get smaller and smaller. So lo and behold, I have my sonogram, and the doctor says, well, it's so many centimeters, and I said, would that be like a walnut? He goes, yeah, exactly, that's what I would say. So, you know, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I kind of hear the choir of angel voices, and I'm like, oh my God. I have been teaching the mind-body connection to students and people and teachers. I mean, and you know, people making masks and things like that. But here I had experienced it. So that was the big motivation to do a book. And then I just came up with these 16 images that you'll see in the book and a body story. And that story about the tumor is in there if you kind of read through the lines. I mean, it's kind of apparent, I think. So I submitted it to the independent publishers, and it got an Emmy Award for Outstanding Book of the Year for most life-changing category, which completely blew my mind. But it helped me to also reframe how I saw myself very powerfully. And so I decided to share this with incarcerated women and at-risk teens in a boarding school, therapeutic boarding school in Arizona. And what I began to understand is that it created an equation. If you have a trauma history, an abuse history, which I have, and you don't see the divinity in your own being, and you do see it in nature. Nature has always been amazing and profound and divine for me. And then you fuse those two, it creates the equation that you have to see the divinity yourself. And that's exactly what happened in the prison, and also with these young girls. My second book, well, this was the book, and then this is when it got the sticker. So the second book was working with these girls in the therapeutic boarding school and the and the incarcerated women. And I also used, during the week of the project, the workshop, a projection process that actually came out of my student teaching in West Philadelphia, where I used a slide projector and I projected their silhouettes and made portraits. Well, taking that to the next level in a therapeutic kind of workshop, I do a guided imagery, and the person comes up with a pose that's going to be a silhouette, and then they fill in that silhouette metaphorically for what's going on inside of them. And that also turned out to be quite profound of an experience. So during that week, both the girls and the women in both the workshops also did drawings. So this young lady, and this was run by Mormons, the school, so I hadn't figured out yet how to get skin tone leotards and that sort of thing, so that's a t-shirt that's sort of folded up. The University of New England has this in their collection, and this was her drawing. And one of the things that happened to her is she'd gotten involved with heroin and living on the street, and she was with a male who would not let her write or draw. So the hand that's all sort of smeared out is the hand that got denied, and coming from behind in the back was the more articulate hand that was surviving. So she eventually, her true nature came through. And this is one where you can see the difference in the leotard. And I don't know if you can see her eyeliner. This was a medium security prison, so they were allowed to have makeup. And knowing I was going to use photography, she put these big turquoise eyeliner pieces on. And this was her drawing. And then I just have one more that I'm sharing with you from the incarcerated women. This woman's name was Robin. And Robin was a battered wife, and she was terrified of her husband who murdered a man, and so she was afraid to testify against him. And because of that, they gave her 15 years, and he got life, so he wouldn't have been able to do anything about it anyway. She had a 6-year-old when she went into prison. No one made any effort to bring her 6-year-old to see her the entire 15 years. So she was within 1 week of getting out and possibly meeting her 21-year-old daughter. So what she wrote for this image, and if you look at the book, you'll see her story in there. This was called Waiting for Life to Begin. And actually the slide is of the coast of Newfoundland that I used to go camping up there. And so it's kind of beautiful edged rock. Waiting for life to begin. Fluttering wings of uncertainty, stumbling down an uneven path with years of soft clay. All is buried ceremoniously. Future thoughts awaken great anxiety, but my soul has become grounded with my body, waiting for life to begin. So I'm actually in touch with her on Facebook, and she's in Seattle, and she loves animals, and she works in a shelter. So I submitted this book to the Independent Publishers Association. Oh, there's her drawing. Now, these women, this was in like 2007, 8, 9, somewhere in there. They didn't know anything about cell phones. They've been in for 15 years. So, she didn't have any contact with any of that sort of thing. I thought this was a remarkable drawing. So I submitted it. This was the cover. And lo and behold, it got a gold medal in the inspirational spiritual category. And I got to go to New York City, and they gave me a big medal like this on a blue ribbon and get a certificate and all this. So I recommend, if anyone's a writer, don't hesitate to send your stuff into the Independent Publishers Association. So given the challenging relationship with our bodies when we have a trauma history, and the challenge that can create, when I turned 60, which I was blown away that I was turning 60 anyway, I had to create a celebration for this vessel who had carried my spirit all this way. So I projected my own watercolors onto my body, and then a year later I reversed those images from what are considered a negative in photography. And the first image that you saw won an award for single image in Color magazine, and then this whole series, of which there were about 10, were given an Artist Spotlight Award in Color magazine, so the whole portfolio was published. So as my art, here's just one more of high school students in Maine that had been my students. See, if I'd been into this back then, you guys would have been my subjects. This one also did get a single image award from Color magazine. They had just graduated, and I taught a private program in Maine for 25 years out of my studio. So I got to have kids for like 12 years of their education. They started with me in first grade, and I all the way up, so it's kind of like their auntie. Being that my art has often been a way that I navigate difficult times in my life, and it's been really important for my own healing and transformation, it was a natural thing for me to work out an unexpected trauma of loss through betrayal in 2013. And I remembered I came across a picture. Cookie, you and Sarah came up and visited me right at that time, but I wasn't talking about any of that then. After 11 years, I found out that my life partner had been lying to me about his alcoholism. And he was Mr. Challenge number 3, and I thought I had finally found the person that I was going to grow old with. And in my recovery and my work with a therapist, I wrote a poem. And the poem talked about how it was as if there had been this snake in the basement of the relationship, very covertly moving with the stones of the foundation so slowly, one at a time, that I just kind of didn't even notice until it collapsed. And in fairness to me, the first 6 years of the 11 years was done long distance, Port Townsend, Washington State to Bryant Pond, Maine. So pretty long distance. So this is the interesting part. The therapist told me, she said, the snake is also you. And then I needed to see the snake. And I needed to be the snake, and I needed to see the snake. So as someone who's been a victim their whole life, it's really hard to see your participation in being the victim, and that you are also an active participant. So it took many hikes up the mountain that I did every day. It was my ritual. And I then began to see this piece. This piece. And as the piece emerged, and I'm sure many of you who make art and do creative things, especially like writing a song, you don't know where it's going. You just have a thread that you pull, and you pull, and you go a little further. And as the piece emerged, I noticed that the snake was starting to transform from dark to light. And it came up through the ground that had freesias underground that were then blooming. And when it touched my heart healed. And that's when I knew I needed to let my heart feel everything and let it all be externalized. So I started with bleeding heart because that was the first sensation that came to me. And the statements came with each one. And this was bleeding heart. And then I did betrayed heart, and then broken heart. And I'll just read broken heart if you haven't read it out there, because I kind of liked this one because it was a play on something I'd grown up with about, a kid's thing, sticks and stones. The deep ache of coming apart, the sear of my psychic skin, sticks and stones did not, but lies broke my bones. My son was going to come, and he has a baby, so he didn't come, and I'm kind of glad because it's just so, it's like, what he would think, oh, Mom. I mean, he's seen all this anyway, but, and I have to admit, I held nothing back. So, and especially with this one, Deceived felt like I had broken glass in my veins, and it went through my heart. I mean, that's how it felt. Now, what's interesting to me is this is Diminished Heart, and I can remember feeling Diminished Heart as a child in a domestically violent home. My mother was an alcoholic, and I remember, just feeling that little tiny heart. So this was part of what that one was also about. And then Silent Heart is my Quaker heart, because it's the stillness. If you read the poem, it's about that absolute empty stillness that we do in meeting and wait for something to come in. It's also interesting that Silent Heart is the one I did when I left Maine. And this series took 3 years. So from here on, it's happening in Pennsylvania. And so this is actually the first one. It took 3 years to work through the process. And interestingly, for the last 2 years, I was waiting for my house in Maine to sell. So I was living with other people without my own home, my own space. I moved 5 times. But here's a really important thing, and I'm so glad Sarah Webster is sitting here. Sarah's my high school friend, and she's the one I moved in with first when I moved here. She traded me studio space in her law office for me being office support in her law office. That was my constant. That was my steady connection. I had a studio the whole time that I was working on these. The rest of my life was a huge question mark. When's my house going to sell? Where am I going to live? How am I going to do this? Am I going to be able to afford it? When is it going to happen? Should I take a job? No, don't take a job. It might happen. Oh, it's going to happen this fall. Oh, it's going to happen this spring. I mean, crazy for 2 years. But the constant that I had, thanks to Sarah, was my studio, which is what enabled me to go through this process and continue to do these. And it got better because first it was an office, and then somebody needed that office. There was a suite across the parking lot of many rooms, and I was able to actually put all my work up in that space. So, I mean, how lucky is that? Amazing. Sarah, thank you so much. So important. So that one was tender heart, and then hopeful heart, and then resilient, and peaceful, and trusting, little bird nest, and grateful. So you see the progress. And then open, and then playful, and then passionate, and then high heart. And high heart, I want to explain. I studied with a woman who's an intuitive, and she taught us all kinds of stuff about intuition and things. And one of the things that we learned is that when you receive and give, you have what she called a high heart, and it's above the pump that is your heart. And it's kind of up here. So when we would do these visualizations, or we would do these intuitive readings off of photographs and stuff, we would imagine that being the place and the opening. So there's a double meaning for high. It's high, what would I say? Elevated, ecstatic, those kinds of things. But it's also meaning that high heart place. And that's why it's so non-Quaker and gold and pearly and sparkly and all that stuff. So, this is the whole series, and Cookie right away said Stations of the Cross. I know so little about Catholicism, but for some reason I had that idea in my mind that they were kind of like the Stations of the Cross and that you would visit it and that sort of thing. And the one thing I do, since I do books now, the one thing that I am totally intending to do and have started is to make a coloring book with this series. And I have these little cards out in the on the table. If anyone wants to know when the coloring book is done, just fill this out, and then I'll make sure that you get notification that that's done. And I think the thing that's going to be important about this coloring book is the reason the coloring book thing took off is because as soon as you start to draw, you do go into the right hemisphere of your brain, you go into alpha waves, you get a sense of relaxation and calm, you lose track of time, all those wonderful things. Well, and if somebody wants to actually work on healing and transformation, I think going through this coloring book, stage by stage by stage, and I'm going to have my little statement, and then we're going to say, and what would you say, and what do you have to say? And so someone could write, and then they could draw, and I think it could be really helpful. So I actually have 50 years of making art behind me, and so I didn't know how much to do. I'm going to kind of just sort of whiz through some of this. This was a monument. This is the picture from 1972 in my senior BFA graduation, and it's a memory of a memorial to something that happened to me when I was 11. And essentially what it was is one of those mystical moments. I don't know, maybe most people don't have them, but I was really lucky to have one. Going across the field in the soft earth, and time stopping, and me feeling like I was buried in the dirt up to, I don't know, like my knees or something, the layers of the earth, and then feeling like I was up into the cosmos above. And this is what it looks like now, being aged, because I've been lugging this with me my whole life since I was a senior in college, and I made it. And that's supposed to be the latitude and the longitude and the stars of the cosmos and kind of representing my head, and it's exactly my height. And I did it because when I did that feeling of being implanted and feeling those layers, that was just the physical sensation. The emotional sensation was there was a consciousness there. Somebody was seeing me, which was very profound, having two narcissistic parents. To be seen, really feel seen. And it wasn't only that I was seen. I didn't hear anything, but I felt this being seen. And I also really palpably felt loved, incredibly loved. So I think that is one reason why my recovery from our family of origin is very different from my siblings. And I feel very grateful for it. And I was 11, and then next year I go to Lenape Junior High and go home with Nancy Welsh, and on a Saturday night she says, we're going to Quaker meeting tomorrow, you want to come? And I walk into Doylestown meeting and felt like that was my home. And I felt like I should be there and never left. So very woo-woo, very out there, but it's really my experience. So, and I think that that's been a profound reason why I've been able to do the artwork, the work with people. So very quickly, this was one of the first masks I made, and the woman who made it on me failed to make a mouth. She didn't know me and she didn't want to. And I said, oh, it's probably some of the meaning of the mask. And I have the mask in my studio. I'm putting the black around the eye holes, and this well of sadness just came up my legs and my body, and I just sobbed, and I went, oh my God, you didn't have a voice when you were growing up. So that one's called Silent Scream. I did a costume, I did a performance, I did the whole thing. This one's oh yeah, did you have a question? Oh, you were looking at her like.
Your sound has gone.
Oh, there. Sorry, thank you.
We can hear you, I'm just not sure the live streamers are.
Yeah. This one was trying to get at the anger that everybody told me you have anger from all this. And what was so funny is that
you accessed it pretty well.
Well, I was looking for something a little more rip-roaring, rage, and I kind of got grr. But what was really fun is I did make a costume, and I back-teased my hair, and I had a red strip rip thing, and I ran around with the mask. And in Maine, they have these Grange halls where they have spook houses. And I was a teacher in the district, so I knew every kid because of art, and nobody knew who I was. And I was screaming angry the whole night of Halloween. It was amazing. I mean, I actually got a sore throat, but it was great. It was very therapeutic, so I guess it did its trick. This one was a guided imagery where I got the feeling of gratitude, and I saw this fan of flowers over my head. And then later I did the breastplate that went with it. And for me, this is what prayer looks like to me. This is, you can see the top of the mask a little bit better. And then I did this one on finding my voice, from not having a voice. This one's finding my voice. And my son was in high school. He said, Mom, you look like you're in agony. And I said, well, because the speaking truth to power is not always easy and can be painful. But that my voice comes from down here and comes all the way up and comes out, but also connects me above. And I think it's making this sort of. And then this one is nature is my true parent. I mean, part of in recovery, what I had a hard time with was how did they, Art and Lorraine, which that's how I got my name actually, A-R and L-A, how did they do what they did to us? I mean, how could they possibly do that? They're not my parents. I was actually born from the planet, so I decided that nature, my true parent, and I wanted it to look like I had come out of the earth, and I had lichen and all this stuff all over me. And then I realized later, they did the best they could, or they would have done something else. So I still call it nature, my true parent. This was a woman that I worked with, where I did the guided imagery, and I did the mask based on what she said. And she was a midwife, and she was also dealing with betrayal. She had gone to South America to learn water birthing, and her partner went off with somebody else. And she said during the guided imagery that she was giving birth to herself, and she saw the birth blood, and I'm like, I'm not making a mask with blood on it. I don't think so. And yet, when I made the mask, that's all I could see was the way she described it. But when you look at her face, the peace in her face, it kind of all made sense. And then another one where I made the mask of another person, but based on their guided imagery, was a woman, a Quaker that some of you may know, Charlotte Fartleman. And I just decided I was tired of not having a mom that I could talk to and be friends with and share with, so I adopted her as my mom. And I went and did a guided imagery with her, and her guided imagery said, even though she was, and at that time in her 70s, and many people were dying that she knew, she felt like she was more held by God's hands now than before. So, and the other thing about it is, as a Quaker, we have the metaphor of the inner light. So I had made her eyes with organdy, totally not thinking about that, just that was what the solution was. Well, the skylight in the room where it was, the moonlight came through and hit the wall and came out of her eyes. So the inner light was shining out of her eyes, which is just what we say in art is a happy accident. And there's Charlotte. And I wanted to give it to her, and she didn't want it. She was like, no, I don't have a mask of myself. And I'm so grateful because I've had it and carried it with me, and it's like I have Charlotte with me all the time. So it's really great. So then in 2000, I was turning 50, and I broke up with the second Mr. Challenge number 2, so I was alone in the house. I was turning 50, I was having hot flashes. My son graduated and left home, and Mr. Challenge took the dog, and it was really intense. And I did go to Pendle Hill in England and had a 50th, pilgrimage. Went up, climbed Pendle Hill, cried my eyes out, opened them up, and there were these sheep all around me. But I did this piece burning off the past, because what occurred to me is that the hot flashes were actually me burning off what no longer served me. And I had a mechanical issue of how do I attach the masks? And I thought, well, I'll sew them together. And then I thought, well, when I sew them together, why not sew them with golden thread with the things that no longer serve me attached? So I wrote them all out on little pieces of fabric, sobbing, of course, and tying them up, and then tied the piece with that. And then eventually, a few years later, I started to feel unconditional joy, because what I thought was, I never have to do any of that stuff again. And I did this full body casting, and it's called Unconditional Joy, and did it in the winter in Maine next to a wood stove, and with 2 friends that helped me. And I did put a little portrait of myself when I was about 2 or 3, a picture of me in joy, because the truth is, no matter how bad it is, there are times when you do feel joy, or you wouldn't know what joy is. So I put that in there, and then this is the inside of that piece. And then it occurred to me, actually, in Quaker meeting, things come up a lot for me in the silence, what about women who'd had mastectomies? And my mother had just actually had a breast cancer diagnosis and had a mastectomy, so I started thinking about that a lot. And I offered it to a group of women who actually wanted to know, why did a double-breasted woman who just drove 2 hours in the winter come to talk to us and offer this? It must be the money. What do you charge? I had just gotten a Charlotte Fartelman scholarship grant, and I got to say, thank you, Charlotte. I got to say, it doesn't have to cost you anything because I have a grant. And that's when women came forward. So I did workshops, and this was one of the pieces. A woman came from North Carolina who was part of Alamance Medical Regional Center on her honeymoon, was in the gallery in Portland, Maine, and saw the exhibit of the pieces, flipped out, contacted me, and got Alamance Medical Regional to bring me down to North Carolina for 2 summers to do this workshop with women down there. And that's actually a book that I thought I was going to do when I did a body story. Here's another one. And this is the last one. This was a young woman in her early 30s, and that is her hair down the center that she cut off when she was going to get her chemo. And she had a reconstructed breast. They pull your back muscle. That's one option. They pull your back muscle around. And I'm still in touch with Amanda. And this was called metamorphosis because she realized it looked like a butterfly, and the metamorphosis that butterflies do. So I kind of think it's a good half hour, but I did want to just mention a couple of things of research that I found that I think is so fascinating. There's a woman named Doris Banofsky-Arrington, and what she found is that creative activity literally changes the traumatized topography of the brain. Creative activity literally changes the traumatized topography of the brain. So we thought for years before neuroimaging that the brain was the brain, that was it, and if anything, it just got worse as it got older. We can actually change the brain. Also, if you don't access the right brain, this is why I'm gung-ho about people making art, the rational left brain often has created a matrix of protection through minimizing. It's so good at that. Also, I've found that art making is like this personal narrative for renegotiating and reframing personal trauma, and as this whole series proves, and that's a really great way of transforming it. Yeah, neuroimaging has shown us that when we remember trauma, the left frontal cortex shuts down, which is language and reason. And it's the right hemisphere that lights up, and the amygdala that's associated with emotional states. There's this really great place out in California called HeartMath. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of those guys, HeartMath. They do this really wonderful research on the heart, and one of the things that they found was that they looked at the electromagnetic field of the body, different areas, and you would think that the brain would be the strongest electromagnetic field. No. It's the heart generates the strongest electromagnetic field in the body, and it's 5,000 times greater than the brain. So when you walk in a room and you love your students, even if you're strict as hell, they feel it. That's what I was at Springfield, right?
Oh, yeah.
Even though I was called Arla, I was still really strict. You know? Anyway, also this one I love. The brain is made up of neurocells, which we would expect. It's a brain, neurocells. 60 to 65% of the cells in the heart are neural cells. So this is what explains when they say she died of a broken heart. You know, there's a couple, they've been lifelong partners. The husband dies and then the wife dies within months, and there's no real explanation for it. Your heart actually does think, in a sense. And that connection is really, really important. So that's really all I have to offer, but I would love to answer questions and carry on a conversation since you're all here and we're here. If anybody also has any, response, not a question, but a response, we have a mic that we could get it on the tape too if anybody wants to say anything.
So how would you apply this to the opioid crisis?
Oh, wow.
Think about people recovering from addiction, or not even recovering from addiction, but wanting to.
Just
Yes, say that again.
stick it right under,
Yeah.
Right under your mouth.
Drug and alcohol treatment. How would you apply creativity and artwork to those going through that?
I think that the process that I'm talking about in terms of transforming how you understand yourself and how you see yourself is actually good for anything across the board. There's a guy named Gabor Mate. He's Hungarian, and the things he says about addiction are just really, really profound, and I think they make a whole lot of sense. And he talks about them trying to medicate trauma, trying to medicate injury. And if you can see yourself and access that trauma in a different way, and this is why, and I don't really in any way say you shouldn't sit down and talk to a therapist. I did a ton of that. That cognitive stuff and talking is good, but there are times when you need to go in the back door and access through a very different place. I'll tell you one really good example. At that therapeutic boarding school in Arizona, in the drawing thing with the shadow, I had this young girl, after we did the guided imagery, who pulled me aside and said, I was gang raped and cut. Can I do that? And I said, absolutely, you can do anything you want. You can cut the paper, you can, just let it go. And she went in a separate room, and that's exactly what she did. And her pose was a profile from the side, all crunched over. And so she blood and cut and stuck pins in it and did the whole thing. So then she came back and we make a circle, and being witnessed is a really important part of the art expressive healing thing. And it was really hard for her, and the girls in the group, we had all the things of protection of the circle and confidentiality, and she told them what it meant. And it was pretty intense, so you knew there was a big story behind it. And then she pulled me aside and she said, can I do another one? And I said, sure. So she gets up in front of the shadow, and I think it was something like this. And I trace it, and she goes in the other room, and she's got all these colors on stuff, and she comes back and she says, they didn't get me, I'm a dancer. So the next day, her therapist finds me, and she goes, what the heck? I have been sitting with this girl in a chair for like a year and a half. She never told me this. What's up? And see, I am not a therapist. I am a BFA, ED, MFA in sculpture. I do not pretend to be an art therapist. But when you can go through that other avenue, you can access stuff. So, one group of people, as a Quaker, I'm really interested in is PTSD vets. And PTSD vets. And I just feel so much compassion and sadness around what's happened to people who've gone and served in those stupid wars. That I think there's, and I have actually seen that there's been some mask making done at different times, and I don't know what path they take and how they do that. But so I think any trauma, any addiction. I mean, I suppose there are people who don't have trauma that they're trying to medicate that go into addiction, but I don't know. I mean, I can tell you that all the women in prison that I met, every single one of them had been sexually abused. And some stories that were just unbelievable. Separated from her father, one, finally gets to meet him at 13, and what does he do? He sexually abuses her, you know, and gives her drugs. I mean, just incredible stories. So I do think there's potential. One of the books I'd really love to do is kind of like a guide of creative processes, because with 45 years of art teaching lessons, I've got a lot of lesson plans in my head, and then a lot of things that can go therapeutically, like that cast shadow. Those were just little elementary school kids doing portraits at first, but then I realized that it could be used using, I call it bringing the shadow to light, so it's even got like a metaphorical aspect to it. Yes?
Question of what that structure is made of. What is the structure made of that piece of artwork?
Yeah, all the castings that you've seen, even the Unconditional Joy, all of them, I use plaster impregnated gauze, which is the same thing doctors use when they make a cast. And part of the process, in fact, I just had an interview in Bryn Mawr at the Women Life Care Life Center, I don't know their exact name, it used to be the Midwives Birthing Center, and we're going to do a workshop in July, of pregnant women as a kind of baby blessing. What it is you get this very mummy look, and you've got to, mummy, M-U-M-M-Y, and you have to get rid of the plaster gauze. So I use joint compound and, you know, fill, sand, and then there's all kinds of ways to bring it to life as a sculpture. And when I did those down in North Carolina, I was thinking about it the other day. I can't believe I got on the plane with mirrors this big, with boxes that I sent also of everything from sand I'd collected in California when I was on a beach, to the moss on my hill in Maine, to little feathers I found. I mean, just so much stuff so that they could decorate them in the ways that they were led to. I did it actually at FGC in Wisconsin. I did a breastplate workshop. Gretchen Castle, I don't know if you know who she is, but she took my workshop. I did not know she was married to Ken Miller, who I grew up
I was
with.
going to say that's Doylestown meeting, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that she was married to Ken, because she has a different name.
Right.
Ken Miller was Kenny Miller when I was growing up, and he was very quiet and introverted, and he went to George School, and he wore a black suit, and he was like a real Quaker man, and a kid guy. And I was like, all I wanted to do was go to George School, but I went to public school. And when she came to the final day where we had an exhibit of all the breastplates, and we had people come one at a time with their families, and she walked down the hall with Kenny, and I'm like, what? Kenny Miller? Yeah, so, so anyway, it's fairly easy to work with. It does set up. You know, and there are certain things that you need to know about, like a mask, because you have to really cut the pieces small to get the detail, that kind of thing. But that's where the sculpture degree just really helps.
Other questions?
So, would you consider doing something at Pendle Hill? I think Arts and Spirituality Coordinator might. And if so, what might you?
What might I offer?
Yeah, I was thinking, what did you mention about the shadow, bringing the shadow to light?
Bringing the shadow to light is really...
That just
really,
grabbed me right away.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Oh, I need to say that I did get another Quaker grant. It's called the Obadiah Brown Benevolent. Yeah, I got that in New England Yearly Meeting. And it was after working with indigenous tribes in Maine for 3 years, maybe 3.5 by then. And I was on the call with mostly Native social workers and community organizers. And they were talking about art and healing modalities. And I just decided to speak up, and I said, would you guys like me to apply for a grant to do art and healing? And there was this long silence, which actually often is in, as much as Esther and Denise will say, no, we don't. Yes, they do. There's longer pauses, which is why I think Quakers are a good fit. And they said, yeah, Arla, yeah, we want to offer that. So I applied for the Obadiah Brown grant, and I got it, and I had to do some matching fundraising. And I did mask making on Indian Island with the Penobscot, and I went up north and did the Bringing the Shadow to Light with the Passamaquoddy in Sepayik. And my promise to them was that I would never use their images, just to make it really safe. But boy, that was really amazing. And I would love to be able to do more of that. And Kisatano did say to me once when he had moved back up to Canada, we're talking about mask making, and maybe you'd come and do that. But it didn't go any further than that. But yeah, the Bringing Shadow to Light is really doable because it's not long and drawn out, and there's not a lot of materials. And a slide projector is what I use. Yeah, that'd be great.
I love your images.
Thank you.
I'm a fan.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I am a fan of yours.
Any other questions?
Comments?
Well, I like the body, the fact that you're speaking about embodiment, but yet you're using that, you're using the metaphor around the limitations of a physical format of the human body.
Well, I think the reason all these modalities work really well, the projection onto the body, the cast shadow, and the castings, are because it's bringing the internalized stuff to it's using the body, it's getting at the body. And in fact, the masks are a little bit harder because people get a little more heady when it's a mask. And they get a little bit more like, does that look like me? And that kind of stuff. Whereas the body, the torsos, seem to be a lot less that way. But even the mask making, I mean, what happens to most people is like they'll take the mask off and they'll go, oh my God, I see my dad, or oh my God, that looks like my uncle, or there's like some kind of recognition. Or one thing that happened with the breastplate with a young man at the Omega Institute actually had something I'd never seen before, but it's where the sternum at birth has like a concavity. And he had spent his whole life being really, really ashamed, and really embarrassed about it, and hiding, always wearing a t-shirt when he was swimming and all that. So we did a breastplate with him, and it was a woman friend who was there and me. And one of the things that I do in the casting, especially the breastplate, is when it sets up and it's this hard crust, I say, we're going to release this now. Is there anything that you no longer want to carry, that you want to give to this crust that's coming off? And at the same token, as that comes off, is there anything you want to invite into the soft body that's underneath? So that's when he really started to acknowledge what it was, and he shed tears, and he wanted to no longer feel that way, and all of this. And then when we took it off, and he saw it from the inside, he went, hey, it's not that bad. Oh my gosh. It's not, and then he said, and you know what? I'm a really receptive guy. This is the container where I receive and hold empathy, and he just completely reframed it. So, it really is about the body and embodiment, and we don't do much of that. I mean, we eat like crazy, and then we get really upset at our bodies, and then we deny them, and then we criticize them, and then we're so heady in our culture. And we're so left-brained. Schools are so left-brained. I mean, that's why when I used to do these artist in residencies in Maine, and I'd go into the school and where they don't have art, and they would cheer. And I knew it wasn't me. I knew it was that I was bringing them right brain time. And they were going to get out of that left brain thing. So, yeah, the right brain and creativity is a wonderful thing. So, good place to stop. Yeah, thank you guys so much. I should, my commercial. I brought 5 of each of the books, and they're signed, and I also brought, I'm not ready to break up this series, and Jessie as an artist was really helpful for that, because she's done the same thing where she's had a body of work that's a series, and she definitely supported me in not breaking it up yet, so they're not for sale. Someday they will be, but I have those prints that are for sale. And my friend, Cookie, is going to be my merchant. She's got a little square that plugs in the phone, and if that's, if you're so motivated. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please sign the book with your reflections and comments for the exhibit. Please eat refreshments. We have lots of refreshments.
Rhubarb cake.
Rhubarb cake.
Oh, and I just realized I also have a mailing list out there on the clipboard. If you want to be on my art mailing list, it tells you what I'm doing, stuff like this. I also have a group of people that are starting to be interested in what we're doing with Indigenous rights education, so if you want to know about that. And then the third one is also about the coloring book, but I also have those little things if you want to be on the list for that. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.